Welcome to Hidden Chapters. These are the moments no one talks about. Until now. The message wasn't a threat. It was a countdown. They thought they had leverage. They didn't know I'd already crossed lines that don't exist on any map. The phone buzzed once. No call. No warning. Just a video. I didn't open it right away. Not because I was afraid, but because instinct told me this wasn't random. People don't send videos unless they want to be remembered. When I pressed play, the world narrowed. A small room. Concrete walls. Harsh overhead light. A child sitting on a chair, hands tied, not tightly, but deliberately. Enough to show control. She couldn't have been older than 10. Her face was calm in the way only fear teaches. Quiet. Focused. Like she was trying very hard not to cry. A man stepped into frame. You never see his face clearly. People who do this for a living don't need to be seen. You have something we want, he said in accented English. Polite. Practiced. You have 48 hours to decide if this ends peacefully. He didn't say what they wanted. He didn't have to. The video ended before I could memorize every detail. I sat at my kitchen table, phone face down, listening to the refrigerator hum like nothing in the world had changed. 3 years earlier, I'd promised myself I was done with this life. No more operations. No more lines crossed in silence. I'd traded classified work for a quiet existence built on routine and distance. That promise lasted until the video arrived. Because I recognized the room. Not the location, but the method. This wasn't chaos. This was organized. Kidnappings like this don't target random families. They target pressure points. People connected to something bigger than themselves. People who hesitate to call the police. People like me. My phone buzzed again. A text this time. Coordinates. No explanation. That's when I understood the real message. They weren't asking for money. They were testing whether I was still willing to act. I stood up and walked to the closet I hadn't opened in years. Behind old coats and boxes I never unpacked was a locked case I'd sworn I'd never touch again. Inside it, tools I hoped would rust from neglect. They hadn't. I didn't call the authorities. Not because I didn't trust them, but because time doesn't wait for permission. I made one call. Then another. By sunrise, people who disappeared into civilian life were on their way back, answering a question none of us wanted asked. Not if we would help. But how far we were willing to go. Because somewhere out there, a child was waiting. And I already knew what decision I was going to make. The calls didn't take long. People like us don't need explanations. We don't ask why first, we ask where and when. Every voice on the other end of the line carried the same hesitation I felt. Not fear. Memory. I'm in, one of them said. No questions. Another paused longer. I said I was done. So did I replied. But this isn't about us. That ended the conversation. By noon, I had 3 confirmations and a rough picture of the situation. The coordinates led to a border region everyone pretends is under control. On paper, it was quiet. In reality, it was a corridor, used, traded, and forgotten depending on who was asking. The group behind the video wasn't improvising. They were careful. The bindings weren't cruel. The message wasn't frantic. This wasn't about punishment. It was leverage. And leverage only works if the person on the other side believes there's still a choice. I drove out before sunset, taking the long way, the kind of route that avoids cameras and conveniences. As the city thinned out, my phone stayed silent. No follow-up messages. No reminders. They were confident. That worried me more than threats ever could. At a gas station near the edge of nowhere, I met the first of the others. No greetings. No backstory. We'd done that years ago. Now we just exchanged looks that said we're here. You think this is personal? He asked as we leaned against the hood. It always is, I replied. Even when they pretend it isn't. We mapped what we knew on the back of a receipt. Access roads. Dead zones. Places where signals disappear long enough for things to happen without witnesses. The more we looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't a ransom operation. It was bait. They wanted me to move. To show my hand. To confirm the rumors that I hadn't really retired, I'd just gone quiet. Once we cross, one of the guys said later, there's no clean exit. There never is, I replied. Night fell as we staged near the coordinates they'd sent. From a ridge, I could see a cluster of lights below. Not many. Just enough to suggest activity without advertising it. No guards visible. No noise. That doesn't mean safe. It means controlled. I raised my optics and scanned slowly. Patterns began to emerge, movement timed too precisely, vehicles arriving and leaving without overlap. Professional. I lowered the optics and exhaled. They're waiting, I said. For what? Someone asked. For me to knock, I replied. I checked my watch. 36 hours left. Plenty of time to make mistakes. Or just enough time to make one decision that mattered. I keyed my radio, not to command, not to anyone official, but to the small team standing behind me. We don't rush, I said. We don't react. They nodded. Because if this was a test, then the only way to win was to refuse to play it the way they expected. And somewhere below us, a countdown was still running. We waited until full dark. Not because it was safer, but because it was honest. Night removes excuses. You don't mistake shapes for shadows. You don't confuse movement with imagination. What you see is what's there. From the ridge, the lights below hadn't changed. Still controlled. Still minimal. No generators humming loud enough to advertise power. No music. No chaos. This wasn't a camp. It was a holding point. We split into pairs and moved downhill, slow and quiet, using terrain instead of speed. Dry ground near the edge, softer soil closer to the structures. Footprints mattered now. So did absence of them. Halfway down, one of my guys froze and raised 2 fingers. Voices. Low. Casual. Not tense. People who believe they're unchallenged don't whisper. We adjusted our line and let the voices drift past. No engagement. No contact. Not yet. Closer now, details emerged. Temporary fencing disguised with netting. A vehicle parked nose out, ready to move fast. A single light inside one structure, too bright for comfort, too steady to be accidental. I felt my jaw tighten. That light wasn't for work. It was for watching. I signaled a halt and brought my optics up. Through the window, I saw a chair. Empty. Next to it, a small backpack on the floor. Pink stitching. Worn straps. That told me everything. They hadn't moved the child yet. They were waiting. Perimeter is thin, one of my guys whispered. They're confident. Yes, I replied. That's the mistake. I scanned wider. 2 sentries. Poor overlap. One blind corner near the rear where the ground dipped sharply. Not an accident, just neglect. People who rely on fear forget about angles. I checked my watch. 30 hours left. Plenty of time for them. Not much for her. We didn't discuss the plan out loud. We didn't need to. Everyone here knew the rule when children are involved. No rush. No noise. No mistakes. I shifted my weight and felt the old familiarity settle in. Not adrenaline. Focus. The kind that pushes everything unnecessary out of the way. I keyed my radio once. Single click. Move. We flowed downhill, using the dip in the ground to disappear from sight. Gravel pressed into my palms as I crawled the last few meters. The fence wire was old. Bent. Poorly anchored. I slid through without a sound. Inside the perimeter, the air smelled different. Cleaner. Controlled. I paused outside the structure with the light. And for the first time since the video arrived, something unexpected hit me. Not anger. Fear. Not of what I might do. But of being one step too late. I placed my hand on the doorframe and listened. Inside, someone moved. A chair scraped slightly. A soft sound followed. Breathing. Steady. Small. I closed my eyes once. Then I opened the door. And stepped into the moment that would decide everything that came after. The door opened without resistance. That was intentional. Inside, the light was harsher than it looked from outside, white, steady, unforgiving. The room was small, concrete walls unfinished, corners sharp. No decorations. No clutter. Just control. The child sat on the chair exactly where I expected her to be. Hands restrained in front, not tight enough to injure, tight enough to remind. Her feet didn't touch the floor. She looked up when the door moved. For half a second, fear flashed across her face, quick, practiced, then it stopped. She wasn't panicking. She was assessing. That broke something in me. I raised one finger to my lips and shook my head slowly. "It's okay," I said quietly. "I'm here." Her breathing slowed. Not because she trusted me, but because she wanted to. That mattered. Behind me, the room stayed silent. No alarms. No shouting. Whoever was outside didn't expect interruption. Confidence breeds laziness. I moved carefully, cutting the restraint with a tool already in my hand. No sudden movements. No promises I couldn't keep. As soon as she was free, she stood on unsteady legs and took one step toward me. That's when the radio on the table crackled. A voice. Calm. Familiar from the video. "So," it said, "you decided to come inside." I didn't turn. "Yes," I replied. "I told them you would," the voice continued. "You always do." I placed my jacket around the child's shoulders and guided her behind me, putting my body between her and everything else. "This doesn't end the way you think it does," I said. The voice chuckled softly. "It already did. You crossed the line the moment you showed up." I reached back and felt the child grip my sleeve. She was shaking now. I lowered my voice. "Stay behind me. No matter what happens." The radio clicked again. "Walk outside," the voice said. Slowly. "Bring the child." "No," I replied. That answer carried more weight than any threat. For the first time, the silence outside shifted. Footsteps. Not rushed. Controlled. They were adjusting. I took one step toward the doorframe and glanced at the window. My team was in position now. I could feel it in the timing. In the way the air seemed to wait. "You're not in control anymore," I said into the room. The radio went quiet. Then the power cut. The light vanished instantly, plunging us into darkness. The child gasped once. I pulled her close and turned slightly, positioning us where the wall would protect her. In the dark, you don't see fear. You hear decisions being made. And I knew this was the moment they'd been waiting for. The moment where intimidation was supposed to finish the job. They were about to learn something they hadn't planned for. I wasn't here to negotiate. I was here to end this. Quietly. Darkness changes the rules. People think it gives cover, but it really does something else. It strips away confidence. In the dark, you can't rely on intimidation. You can't posture. You either know what you're doing, or you hesitate. I didn't hesitate. I shifted my weight, keeping the child behind me, one hand pressed lightly against the wall so she knew where to stay. No panic. Panic spreads faster than sound. Outside, boots moved. Slow. Measured. They weren't rushing the door. They were waiting for me to step out. That told me everything. They wanted control, not chaos. The radio on the table clicked again, softer now. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I ignored it. Instead, I reached down and felt the floor near the doorway. Cold concrete. Dust. A slight groove where the door had scraped over time. Old building. Poor maintenance. Opportunity. I whispered to the child, barely a breath. When I move, stay exactly where you are. Don't follow. She didn't answer. She nodded. I stepped forward suddenly, not toward the door, but sideways, using the wall to mask the motion. At the same time, I reached out and pushed the door hard, letting it swing wide. Shouts erupted outside. Not fear. Surprise. I moved immediately, fast but controlled, slipping past the edge of the doorway into the blind spot I'd noticed earlier. Someone stumbled as the door flew open. Another voice barked an order. Too late. My team acted without sound. Not rushing in. Not firing wildly. Just closing space and removing uncertainty. Within seconds, the yard went quiet again. Not empty. Contained. I stayed where I was, listening. One of my guys tapped twice on the wall near the doorframe. Signal clear. I exhaled slowly and returned to the child. It's okay, I said again, more firmly this time. We're leaving. She looked at me like she was trying to decide if this was real. Then she stood and took my hand. Her grip was tight. Outside, the lights came back on one by one, harsh and unflattering. The confidence was gone now. The posture. The control. The radio on the table crackled once more, but this time there was no voice. Just static. I picked it up and turned it off. Because whatever message they'd been trying to send me, it was finished. We moved out together, not running, not hiding, just leaving the space they thought they owned. As we crossed the yard, I felt the weight shift inside me. Not relief. Finality. Because taking the child out was only part of this. What came next would decide whether this place ever got used again. And I already knew what choice I was going to make. We didn't rush the departure. That's a mistake people make when they think the danger is over. They sprint. They breathe too fast. They forget that control doesn't end when resistance stops. We moved steadily, the child between us, shielded by bodies that knew how to close ranks without speaking. The compound felt different now, smaller, exposed. What had looked like control from the outside was just borrowed confidence. At the perimeter, one of my guys paused and raised a fist. Vehicles. Engines low. Approaching slow. They're not charging, he murmured. They're watching. Of course they were. This had never been about force. It was about leverage. And leverage loses value the moment it's removed. I crouched beside the child and met her eyes. We're going to walk to the vehicles, I said calmly. No running. Stay with me. She nodded again. She'd learned quickly that calm mattered. We stepped into the open. The headlights stayed off. Silhouettes remained near the tree line. Whoever was out there was counting, measuring, deciding whether this was still worth the effort. I raised my voice, not loud, just clear. This is done. No response. I took another step forward. Still nothing. That told me more than shouting ever could. They weren't prepared to escalate. Not without the advantage they'd built this whole operation around. Without it, this was just risk. We reached our vehicles without interference. Doors opened. The child climbed inside, wrapped in a jacket too big for her, watched over by someone who hadn't taken his eyes off the tree line once. As the engine started, a single figure stepped forward from the shadows. He didn't approach. He just stood there, making sure I saw him. A message without words. This isn't forgotten. I met his gaze and nodded once. Neither is this. We drove away slowly, deliberately, headlights finally cutting through the dark. No pursuit. No last-minute bravado. Just distance growing where control used to be. Only when the compound disappeared completely did I allow myself to breathe fully. The child leaned her head against the seat and closed her eyes. Exhaustion took over fast once the fear loosened its grip. One of my guys glanced back at me. What now? I looked at the road ahead, empty, unremarkable, leading away from everything that had almost gone wrong. Now, I said, we make sure she never ends up on another video. And for the first time since this began, that felt possible. But I also knew something else. Places like that don't vanish on their own. They wait. And sooner or later, someone has to decide whether they're allowed to exist at all. We didn't take the fastest route out. Fast routes get watched. Instead, we moved through places that looked boring on a map, service roads, half-finished developments, stretches of nothing where no one expects anything important to pass through. The kind of terrain that never makes it into highlight reels. That's where people disappear safely. The child slept most of the drive, curled against the seat, breathing slow and even. Trauma doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like exhaustion finally winning. We stopped just before dawn at a place that wasn't official and didn't need to be. No signs. No flags. Just a building that existed because someone once decided it should. I handed her over to people who didn't ask questions out loud. They checked her pulse, her temperature, her eyes. Gentle. Professional. Human. Before she was taken inside, she turned back once and looked at me. "Are they coming back?" she asked. "No," I said. It wasn't a promise. It was an assessment. She nodded, satisfied with that, and followed the woman holding her hand through the door. Only after it closed did I feel the weight settle fully. One of my guys leaned against the wall beside me. "You know they'll respond." "Yes," I said. "But not tonight." We didn't linger. Linger turns clean exits into stories. As we pulled away, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. No message. Just a missed call. That was deliberate. They wanted me to know they were still watching. That they could reach out whenever they wanted. I deleted the call log and powered the phone down. Power isn't about reach. It's about restraint. Later that day, information began to surface, quietly. Routes avoided. Contacts suddenly unavailable. A location that used to be useful becoming inconvenient. Nothing dramatic. Just friction. Someone had decided the operation wasn't worth the attention anymore. That's how these things usually end, not with sirens or announcements, but with absence. With people choosing easier paths elsewhere. By the time night came again, the story was already fading into rumor. A video that never surfaced. A message that never got answered. A place that lost its purpose. I sat alone and thought about how close it had all come to going the other way. Not because of violence. Because of hesitation. If I'd waited. If I'd asked permission. If I'd treated the message like a negotiation instead of a line being crossed. Sometimes the most dangerous moment isn't the confrontation. It's the pause before it. And once you move past that pause, there's no going back to who you were before. There's only what you chose to protect. The days that followed were intentionally uneventful. That's how we wanted it. No follow-up messages. No new videos. No reminders that someone, somewhere, was unhappy with how things had ended. Silence like that doesn't mean approval, it means recalculation. I stayed where I was longer than planned. Not hiding. Waiting. Waiting tells you things running never will. News cycles moved on. Other stories took their place. No reports about missing operations or sudden crackdowns. The kind of quiet that doesn't attract attention because nothing obvious is missing. That mattered. One afternoon, I walked past a playground near where we were staged. Children ran in loose circles, laughing without watching the road. I stopped longer than I meant to. The image stuck. Because somewhere else, a chair had been left empty. I received confirmation through a channel that didn't leave records. The child was safe. Not relocated, not hidden, safe. Surrounded by people who knew how to put space between her and the past. That was the outcome we'd aimed for. Not justice. Not closure. Distance. I powered my phone back on that evening. No missed calls. No unknown numbers. Whatever message they'd wanted to send had already been delivered, and ignored. One of my guys asked quietly, "You think they'll try again?" "Not like that," I said. "Operations like theirs depend on leverage and predictability. They'd lost both. Trying again would mean admitting failure, and groups built on control don't do that unless they have to." We dismantled what little infrastructure we'd used. No footprints left behind. No habits to trace. By the time we moved out, the place felt like it had never mattered. That's the best way to leave. Before I departed, I stood alone for a moment and thought about how easily it could have gone the other way. How close the video had come to becoming something permanent. People talk about saving lives like it's an event. It isn't. It's a series of small decisions made quickly and lived with slowly. I didn't feel like a hero. I didn't feel like anything special. I felt finished. Finished with that chapter. Finished with the need to look back. As I drove away for the last time, the road stretched ahead, empty and ordinary. And that's when I knew the story was almost over. Because when nothing follows you, it usually means you did it right. Life has a way of filling the space after something ends. Not all at once. Slowly. Carefully. Like it's testing whether you're ready to move on. I went back to routines I'd built on purpose, early mornings, quiet work, days that didn't demand decisions with consequences attached. On the surface, everything looked the same. But it wasn't. Once you step back into a world like that, even briefly, it changes how you see ordinary things. A locked door. A passing truck. A phone vibrating on a table. None of it feels neutral anymore. I never heard from the people we handed her over to again. That was by design. The less contact, the better the distance. Distance keeps stories from resurfacing. Still, sometimes I wondered. Not where she was, that didn't matter. But who she'd become once the fear stopped shaping her days. Weeks later, an envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a single piece of paper. No message. Just a drawing. Crayon. Uneven lines. A house. A sun. A stick figure holding another, smaller one by the hand. I stared at it longer than I expected. There was no way to prove it was from her. No signature. No confirmation. But I didn't need one. I folded the paper carefully and placed it somewhere I wouldn't see every day, but wouldn't forget either. The world moved on the way it always does. Other groups filled the vacuum left behind. Other roads became dangerous. Other decisions waited for someone else to make them. That's how it works. You don't end anything permanently. You just interrupt it long enough for something better to take its place. People ask if it was worth it, stepping back into a life I'd deliberately left behind, risking attention I'd spent years avoiding. They expect a complicated answer. There isn't one. When I think about that night now, I don't remember the compound or the voices or the tension. I remember the moment the door opened. The moment the restraints fell away. The moment fear gave up control. That's what stays. Not the danger. Not the cost. Just the knowledge that for one stretch of time, the right decision wasn't the easy one, and I still made it. And if the phone ever buzzes like that again, I already know what I'll do. Because some lines, once crossed, don't pull you back. They show you who you are. I never heard from them again. No calls. No videos. No reminders. That's how I knew it was finished. Groups like that don't apologize. They don't explain. When they lose interest, they disappear, not because they're gone, but because the cost of continuing becomes higher than the reward. Silence is their version of retreat. I stayed alert for a long time afterward. Too long, maybe. Old habits don't fade just because the danger does. Every unknown number made me pause. Every unexpected sound made me listen. But nothing came. Eventually, the world proved something I hadn't allowed myself to believe yet. It was over. The child would grow up without remembering the details. Fear fades faster in children when it's cut short. What remains are fragments, faces, colors, moments, never the full weight of what almost happened. That mattered. I returned the equipment to where it belonged. Locked the case. Pushed it back into the dark place it came from. Some tools are meant to stay unused unless absolutely necessary. I hoped I'd never open it again. People talk about closure like it's a door you walk through. It isn't. It's more like distance. The farther you get, the quieter things become. The sharper memories lose their edge. The nights stop replaying the same scenes. Not because you forget. But because you accept. I don't regret disobeying anything that night. Not the order to stay out of it. Not the expectation that I'd negotiate. Not the assumption that fear would slow me down. Because some orders aren't meant to be followed. They exist to reveal who will ignore them. If you're listening to this and wondering what you would have done, I won't pretend there's a right answer for everyone. There's only the answer you live with. Mine was simple. When someone used a child as leverage, I didn't negotiate. I didn't wait. I didn't ask permission. I moved. And somewhere, a life continued without ever knowing how close it came to stopping. That's not something you celebrate. It's something you carry quietly. That's the hidden chapter. And it's the reason some stories are never written down. Except once. By the person who refused to look away. If you want more stories like this, you'll find them here on Hidden Chapters. Like the video and subscribe for the next chapter. And if you were the one staring at those coordinates, would you follow the order? Or trust your instinct? Tell me in the comments.